Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to show you how to correctly prune a rose for spring and how to give it a good hard prune during the winter. So this here is a Floribunda rose. The pruning I'm going to be doing is going to work on any Floribunda rose or hybrid tea rose, basically most roses in your garden. The only type of rose that this won't really work on is a rambling rose or a climbing rose. They have quite a different type of pruning, a lot lighter, not as much material removed. So the best time to do this, you actually want to prune it twice in the year, and I'll go through and I'll prune it in two stages so you can see what to do in autumn and what you can see what to do in winter. With this one, because it's currently pot grown and it's not the biggest of plants, I will be pruning this a little bit harder to keep the size a bit smaller than you will if you had it in the garden. But if you do it in the garden, just don't do it quite as hard as I do it, but you can still give it quite a hard prune. And the reason you want to give it a hard prune is it encourages better flowering next year. It's much stronger growth, better shape, and it also cuts down a lot of the disease problems which you can get if the foliage becomes congested. So beginning in autumn, probably about November, December time, just as the plant stops growing and it starts to lose some of its leaves. Now not all the plants will lose their leaves. It's currently March now, my plant still has its leaves, it's still looking very glossy and healthy. Just depends on the variety of rose you have. Some of them lose their leaves in October, some of them don't lose the leaves at all over the winter. Also depends how hard the frost is. So coming in autumn, you want to give it a moderate prune, and the reason for that is if it has a lot of growth over the winter, the strong winds over winter will keep blowing the plant around. You'll get a lot of rock root, because what happens is the plant will rock side to side, the roots will become loosened, and roses don't have the strongest of root systems, and it can weaken the plant quite a bit if they're rocking around too much in the wind. So what you want to do is get a pair of secateurs, and you really just want to lower the height of the plant down about half of what it is originally. So for example, you want to cut down to a bud here. It doesn't matter too much about which bud you cut down to. The reason for that is you're going to do another prune in spring. But you want to take off a good section of the foliage, cutting down to a bud like so. The buds are going to be either where the leaf joins the stem, or you might see them as a small mark on the stem. There'll be a little line going around the stem, and a little lump just above that line, and that'll be one of the buds. So for example, on this one here, I'm just going to cut all these stems down, probably just to about one bud above the where it's coming out from the main stem. So you can see there, I've cut quite a bit of the material off, and that's just to reduce the height, and that's the kind of pruning you want to do in the autumn. The reason you don't want to go any harder at this time of year is because if you prune it too hard, it will start to re-sprout and put on growth, and you don't want any growth to be put on over winter because the frost is just going to kill it. But if you don't prune it back hard enough, you'll get some wind rock. So you just want to really do a light prune. So coming into spring, this is the time of year when you want to give your rose a hard prune. This one you have to think about a bit more on how you're doing it. So if you do this, probably March time is about the right kind of time. If you live somewhere very cold, you might want to wait until April. But basically, if it starts to put in any new shoots, then you know it's going to be a bit too early, a bit too late, sorry. You don't want it to be growing quite yet. But if you get one or two shoots like this little one here, just very small ones, that's not a problem. But if it's really putting on a lot of shoots, that means you're probably a little bit too late. So you want to make sure it's maybe just got one or two shoots starting to appear, or it's all its leaves are falling off. So basically, March time is about the best time to do it. It just depends on the weather situation where you are. If you're in a very mild climate, maybe February. If you're in a very cold climate, it could be somewhere like April. So what you want to do is you only want a few strong stems. The problem is lots of little stems. The small stems will shoot and they'll have a lot of branches coming out of them, but each branch will be quite small and weak, and small weak branches only support leaves. They won't support any flowers. So what I'm going to do is actually completely remove all these weak branches here, and I'm going to cut them right back to where they join in on the stem. And doing that will stop any of those weak branches from trying to flower. There's also some very small ones here, so I'm also going to remove them as well, because I don't want any of these small weak shoots trying to grow. Next, I'm going to look at my slightly larger shoots, and I'm going to think about how to cut them back quite hard and where I want to do it. So this one here, for example, I'm probably going to cut it back here so it can re-sprout from this bud. This bud is facing outwards, and if you can, you want to try and make sure that the bud is facing out. For example, this one is facing more kind of this way, inwards, so the new growth will come up like that, which may interfere with other shoots coming up from here. Whereas this growth is pointing out this way, so it's going to come out and up and away from the rest of the plant, and that'll just mean it doesn't get too congested. So I'm just going to cut it about half a centimetre above the shoot, just like that. If you cut it a bit lower down, you could damage the shoot and it might not regrow from there. If you do it higher up, you'll just end up with some dieback, a bit like what's happened on these stems here. So next I'm going to have a look at this stem. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to check where the buds are. And looking here, there's quite a nice bud down at the bottom here. I'll just give you a close-up of that now. So you can see in this stem, there's a nice bud pointing out in that direction. So I'm going to cut it just above there. And that bud, because of the direction it's sitting, it will come out in the opposite direction of any of the other stems. So it will make sure the plant is nice and free, good bit of airflow. If you were to cut it so that they all kind of grew and congested together, what would happen is you would end up having a lot of black spot and diseases on the plants. Now this one I've cut back, there is a little bit of black spot which you can see on the stem. Now where possible, you want to cut out as much black spot as you can. So you can see here, there's some dark kind of patches on the stem. That's black spot, it's a fungal disease. If that's left, it will spread to the leaves and cause some more problems as the growing season goes on. So any stems that you see with black spots, you want to try and remove. So there's one other one here, it's quite a major stem, but as you can see there's lots of other stems which are a lot healthier, and this one is kind of going a bit yellow because of the black spot. So I'm going to cut that off as low as I can go, just to make sure there's absolutely no black spot left in this plant, because as I say, if it's left it will just spread to the leaves and cause further problems and disease. So that's that one removed. You can see there, so there is a little bit of black spot on that stem. Now if it does go right to the base of the plant, of course you can't cut it out, you'll just have to leave it and deal with it, maybe put a bit of fungicide. But if you can, if you've got only that only on the upper section of the stem, cut off those sections. Also, if you find any dead bits in your plant, this is a good time to remove it. So you can see this stem here is completely dead. So I'm going to cut that back to where there's the healthy section of the rose. And then finally, you've got this strong stem here. Now because this is such a strong stem, if I cut it back really low down, it will actually grow too strong and it might just shoot up really high again. So I wanted to cut this back a little less harsh than I've cut back these ones. So I'm going to look around, and there's a nice bud on this side which will be facing outwards. So I'm just going to cut this stem off here, about that kind of height, and that will encourage a nice shoot to come up there. So that's about how you want to prune your rose. I've done it quite hard, as I say, because this is growing in a pot and it's on a balcony, so it doesn't, I don't want it to be quite as large. If you were to do this on a shrub rose that was growing out in the garden, you could probably cut the stems twice as long, maybe even 3 times as long, depending on the size of the plant. You want to take off about 3/4 of the growth from last year, so that the plant is a lot smaller. So for example, if this plant was twice the size as the one I've done now, I'd probably only cut it back to about 1 foot or 2 above the ground. But that's it. I'll give you guys an update if you want to look at my videos. I'll have further updates on how this does in spring, and you'll see how it flowers during the summertime. That's all for this update, this tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful for pruning roses. If you have any more questions, please drop a comment below and I'll try and answer your queries.